The recycled air of Station Or9 smelled like metal and old coffee. It always did. Nora Hale had stopped noticing it after the first 3 months. Now, 14 months in, she barely noticed anything unusual about the station at all. The 6-legged Malurans sliding past in the corridors, the Vihari with their clicking jaw plates, the deep hum of the gravity rings that kept everything from floating away. But she noticed the dragon. It was hard not to. Not because the young Drevi was loud or frightening. It was the opposite. She was so still. Every cycle, at the same time, the small violet-scaled creature would come to the wide observation window at the end of Corridor 7 and sit down on the floor. Not a chair. The floor. She would pull her knees to her chest, or the closest thing she had to knees, wrap her tail neatly around herself, and look out at the stars. And she would stay there, alone, for exactly 1 hour. Then she would leave. Nora had seen it 11 times before she finally asked the station directory who the Drevi was. The answer came back simple. Sova. Juvenile Drevi. Ward of Commander Drael, senior Drevi diplomat currently stationed aboard Orin 9. Juvenile. Nora almost laughed. She had looked up Drevi age ranges once. Juvenile meant anything under 150 years old. Sova, according to the file, was 82. 82 years old and sitting alone on the floor of a corridor, watching stars. Nora mentioned it to Ren while they were doing inventory in the medical bay. Ren was crouched under a shelf, counting emergency bandage packs with the focused energy of someone who very much did not want to be doing that. The little violet one, Nora said. Sova, do you know anything about her? I know she's Drevi, Ren said, without looking up. That's enough for me. She sits alone at the observation window every cycle. Same time, every day. Good for her. Today is her name day. That made Ren look up. He had a long face and the permanent expression of someone waiting for bad news. Right now, the bad news seemed to be Nora herself. How do you know that? Station directory. It lists registered crew and diplomat birthdays for scheduling purposes. And nobody has said anything to her. I watched the whole corridor today. Not one person stopped. Not even another Drevi. Ren stood up slowly. He crossed his arms. Nora, I'm not doing anything. You have the face. I don't have a face. You have the face you get right before you do something that makes Director Obu send me a strongly worded message. He pointed at her. Do not interfere with Drevi customs. Their name days are not like our birthdays. They don't celebrate them. Nobody celebrates them. It's a whole thing. Just leave it alone. Nora nodded slowly. Sure, she said. Ren did not look convinced. He was right not to be. The truth was, Nora had already decided. She had decided the moment she looked up the date and saw that today, on this spinning metal station in the middle of deep space, a young dragon was going to sit alone by a window for the 82nd year in a row and have no one mark it at all. Nora was not built for leaving things like that alone. She had tried, once or twice in her life. It had never taken. She finished the inventory. She clocked out of the medical bay. She walked 2 corridors down to the small communal kitchen shared by the human crew. 6 of them in total on the station, which made them one of the smallest delegations aboard. She opened the cabinet above the second counter. Inside, between a box of protein packs and a bag of synthetic rice, was a pouch of reconstituted flour she had been saving for something she kept telling herself she would make eventually. Beside it, a small tin of sugar substitute. Behind that, wedged into the back corner and slightly dusty, a single white candle in a glass tube. She had packed it from home without really knowing why. Emergency morale supply, she had told herself at the time. She took out the flour. She took out the sugar. She took out the candle. Then she set them all on the counter and stood there for a moment, looking at them. 82 years. Alone, every single one. Not because she had done anything wrong. Not because no one was there. Just because her people had decided, somewhere along the way, that the day you were born was not something worth remembering kindly. Nora picked up the flour and started measuring. The cake was not going to be good. She knew that going in. She hadn't baked anything since she was a teenager, and the synthesized ingredients were not exactly premium quality. But it was going to be a cake. That was the point. Behind her, the station hummed its usual low hum. Outside in Corridor 7, a small violet-scaled dragon was already making her way toward the observation window. She did not know yet that this year was going to be different. The kitchen smelled strange. Sova noticed it before she reached the observation window. She had taken the long route, as she always did, past the Vihari quarters, through the narrow maintenance corridor, out near the south docking ring, and then back around to Corridor 7. She liked the long route. It let her see more of the station without being seen much herself. But tonight, somewhere between the maintenance corridor and the docking ring, something reached her. It was sweet, not the cold, metallic sweetness of Drevi's ceremonial drink. This was warm, round somehow, like heat had been folded into the smell itself. There was something else underneath it too, a tiny thread of smoke, dry and quiet. Sova stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the corridor and breathed in slowly, the way her kind did when they were tracking something. Her nostrils widened. The smell was coming from ahead and to the left, from the section of the station she had always avoided, the part where the 6 humans lived and cooked and made their strange, constant noise. She told herself she was going to the observation window. She walked toward the smell instead. She stopped outside the door to the human communal kitchen. The door was halfway open. Through it came light, warmth, and the full force of that impossible sweetness. Inside, the human woman named Nora Hale was making a mess. Sova had seen Nora before. Most of the station had. Nora was the human who asked too many questions, smiled at species who could bite her in half, and once spent 3 days learning 12 words of Vihari just to say good morning to the dock crew. The Vihari had not known what to do with that. Neither had Sova. Right now, Nora had flour on her left cheek, a smear of something dark on her wrist, and was frowning at a small round container sitting on the counter like it had personally offended her. Standing a little further back, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, was the other human, Ren. He was watching Nora with the expression of someone watching a small fire and deciding it was not yet worth putting out. "It's leaning," he said. "It's not leaning. It's leaning to the left. That's just the angle you're looking at it from. Nora, the cake is leaning." Nora put both hands on the counter and stared at the cake. It was leaning, not dramatically, just enough to make it look like it was trying to walk somewhere. "It adds character," she said. Ren made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Sova watched through the gap in the door. She had never seen a cake before. She knew the word. Station files included a basic glossary of human food terms, but the glossary had said simply, baked sweet good, consumed during celebrations. This told her almost nothing useful. What she was looking at was a small, round, layered object, slightly tilted, covered in something pale and uneven, with a thin white stick standing up from the center. It looked like something that had survived an accident and was pretending it hadn't. Inside, Nora picked up the white stick and held it for a moment. She turned it over in her fingers. Then she set it carefully in the top of the cake, pressing it down gently so it stood straight. Ren raised an eyebrow. "Is that a real candle?" "Yes." "You brought a real candle to a space station." "I brought it for emergencies." "And this is an emergency." Nora looked at him steadily. "Ren, she's 82 years old, and nobody has ever made her a birthday cake." Ren opened his mouth. He closed it again. He looked at the cake. He looked at the candle. He looked back at Nora. "You don't even know if she eats sugar," he said. But his voice was quieter now. "I know she'll know someone made it," Nora said. "That's the part that matters." Sova did not move from the doorway. She was not sure she could move. There was something happening in her chest that she did not have a name for. It was not hunger. It was not fear. It was something softer and more confusing than either of those things. And it had started the moment she heard Nora say the words nobody has ever. 82 years. Nora had said it like it was a long time to go, without something that should have been simple. Sova had never thought of it that way. She had simply thought it was the way things were. Nora lit the candle. The small flame rose up, steady and warm, and threw a little circle of gold light across the top of the tilted cake. Then she turned around. She looked directly at the gap in the door. She did not startle. She did not reach for anything. She just looked at the doorway with calm, steady eyes and said, simply, quietly, like it was the most natural thing in the world, "It's for you. Come in if you want." Sova did not move for a long moment. The flame on the candle burned without flickering. Then, slowly, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warmth of the kitchen settled around her like something she had not known she was cold without. Ren left without being asked. He picked up his mug, looked once at Sova, who had stopped just inside the doorway, filling a surprising amount of the room with her presence, and then looked at Nora. Nora gave him a small nod. He gave Sova a polite, careful dip of his head and walked out. The door stayed halfway open. Nora did not close it. She understood, without needing to think about it too hard, that a creature who had never been in a human space before would want to know the exit was still there. Sova stood near the wall and looked at the cake. The candle was still burning. The small flames sat on top of the tilted little cake and burned with complete indifference to how strange this situation was. Nora appreciated that about candles. "You can come closer," Nora said. "It won't do anything." Sova moved forward, not all the way to the counter, but far enough that she could see the cake clearly. Her eyes, large, pale gold with a thin dark line down the center, moved over it slowly and carefully, the way Nora had seen her kind examine things they were trying to understand without letting on that they didn't. "What is it?" Sova said. It was not quite a question, more like a thing said aloud while thinking. "A cake," Nora said. "A birthday cake, specifically. Though among my people we also call it a name day cake sometimes." Sova looked at her briefly, then back at the cake. "You knew?" The station directory lists registered name days. A pause. Something moved across Sova's face that was too quick and too controlled for Nora to read. Then it was gone. "And the fire," Sova said. "That's a candle. One for each. Well, traditionally one for each year, but you're 82, and I only had one candle, so we're doing symbolic." Nora leaned on the counter. "The tradition is this. You look at the flame. You make a wish, something you want, something you hope for. It can be anything. You hold on to it in your mind, and then you blow the candle out." Sova was quiet for a moment. "And if you blow it out completely in one breath, the wish comes true. That's what people say anyway. Do you believe that?" Nora thought about it honestly. "I believe that it makes people stop for a moment and think about what they actually want. That part's real, even if the rest is just a nice story." Sova looked back at the flame. She was very still, the kind of still that Nora was beginning to recognize as dreamy concentration, not absence, but presence pulled inward. "A wish," Sova said slowly. "Something you want. That's it." Another silence. Nora waited. She was good at waiting. It was possibly the most useful thing she had learned in 14 months on a multi-species space station. That silence between species did not always mean discomfort, and rushing to fill it was usually a mistake. Sova stared at the candle for a long time. Nora watched the flame. It burned straight and calm. The kitchen was warm. Outside in the corridor, something heavy moved past, probably one of the night shift Malurans, and then it was quiet again. Then Sova leaned forward. She took a breath. A deep one. Nora saw her chest expand, saw the faint shimmer along the edges of her violet scales as her lungs, much larger than any creature her size had any right to possess, filled completely. Nora had just enough time to think, "Oh no," before Sova blew. It was not a large breath. By Drevi standards, Nora would later learn, it was a restrained and careful breath. An indoor breath. A considerate breath. It still blew every loose item off the counter, sent Nora's hair straight back from her face, knocked the flower tin off its shelf, and put out not only the candle, but also the small overhead light, which flickered off and then back on again with a nervous buzz. The cake, to its credit, did not move. It sat exactly where it was, unlit candle now tilting at a new angle, completely unimpressed. Silence. Nora straightened up. She pushed her hair back from her face. She looked at the cake. She looked at Sova, who had pulled back slightly and was holding herself with the rigid posture of a creature waiting to be told it had done something wrong. Then Nora laughed. She did not mean to. It came out of somewhere genuine and surprised, a Drael laugh, full and unguarded. The kind that came when something was so absurd and so perfect at the same time that the body just decided to express it. Sova stared at her. Nora pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to bring herself back. "Sorry," she managed. "I'm sorry. You were so careful about it." "I was being careful," Sova said, with great dignity. "I know. I could tell." Nora looked at the flower tin on the floor. "I think you got it in one breath." Something changed in Sova's expression. Just slightly. Just around the edges. "The wish," she said. "The wish," Nora agreed. Sova looked down at the cake. The smoke from the candle was still rising, a thin pale thread curling up toward the ceiling. "What do I do now?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet, quieter than before. The question was simple, but Nora heard the weight underneath it. Not just what do I do with the cake, but something larger, something that had been waiting a long time to be asked by someone who might actually answer it without making her feel small for not knowing. Nora picked up the small knife she had set out on the counter. Now, she said, we eat it. Sova did not eat the cake. She was not rude about it. She sat down on the floor. There were no chairs in the kitchen large enough for her, and the ones that were large enough belonged to the Maluran crew, so the floor was the only honest option. And she looked at it while Nora cut a slice and ate it with the quiet commitment of someone who had made this cake and was going to eat it no matter what it tasted like. It tasted like effort and synthetic sugar and something that was almost vanilla if you were generous. Nora ate the whole slice. Sova watched her the way she watched most human behavior, with focused, unreadable attention, like she was memorizing something she hadn't decided what to do with yet. Do your people eat things like this often? Sova said. Sweet things? Yes, humans like sweet things. We eat them when we're sad, when we're happy, when we're celebrating, when we're bored. We're not particularly selective about it. That seems impractical. It is. We enjoy it anyway. Sova looked at the cake again. Her tail moved slightly, a slow sweep across the kitchen floor. You made this today, she said. Specifically today. Yes. Because of the date. Yes. Sova was quiet for a moment. Then she said, no one has ever done that before. She said it plainly, without drama, just a simple statement of fact. But Nora heard all the years behind it. 82 of them, stacked up like empty rooms. Tell me about your name days, Nora said. What do they usually look like? For a moment she thought Sova was not going to answer. The young Drevi looked at the wall, then the window, then back at the extinguished candle. Her scales shifted slightly along her neck, a small movement that Nora had noticed Drevi made when they were deciding something. They are not like this, Sova said finally. I didn't think so. On a name day, a young Drevi stands before their elder at the start of the cycle. You are expected to give an accounting. Sova's voice was even and careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed the words without rehearsing the feeling underneath them. Every year you have lived, you must show what you gained from it. What strength, what knowledge, what you shed that was weak, what you became. Nora set her fork down. And if the accounting is not good enough, Sova continued, the elder says so. Clearly, there is no softening of it. Because among my people, softening the truth is considered a cruelty. It is better to know. And your accountings, Nora said carefully, have they been good enough? Sova did not answer right away. She looked at her own hands, the long, scaled fingers, the sharp edges of her claws. She turned one hand over slowly, as if looking at something she had studied many times and still not understood. Commander Drael is thorough, she said. He does not miss things. That was not an answer. Nora understood that it was the closest Sova was going to come to one. So every year, Nora said, on the day you were born, you stand in front of someone and get told everything you still aren't. Sova looked at her. It is meant to drive progress. Does it? A long pause. I do not know. I have not yet become what I am supposed to become. Nora looked at her. This 82-year-old creature who had come to sit alone by a window every year because the only thing her birthday meant to her was another round of being found insufficient. Can I tell you something? Nora said. Sova tilted her head slightly. I think that's a terrible way to spend a birthday. Sova blinked. It was a slow blink, the Drevi kind. It is tradition. So was a lot of things that turned out to be terrible ideas. Nora folded her hands on the counter. Among humans, a birthday is the one day that belongs entirely to you, not to what you should be or what you haven't become yet, just to the fact that you're here, that you made it through another year in a universe that is very large and very indifferent, and here you still are. That's the whole thing. That's what the cake is for. Sova looked at the cake. She looked at it for a long time. That is very simple, she said. Yes. Drevi do not think like that. I know. To celebrate simply existing, without measuring what the existence produced, it would seem like. She paused, searching for the word. Like telling someone their work is good when it is not. Like a kindness that makes them weak. Or, Nora said, like reminding someone that before they can become anything, they have to first be allowed to just exist, without a score attached. Silence settled over the kitchen. Not uncomfortable. More like the kind of silence that comes after something has been put into the open air for the first time and needs a moment to settle. Sova looked at the candle again. The one she had blown out. The one she had made a wish on, though she had not told Nora what she wished for. Nora did not ask. Some things were private. That was part of the whole point. Then, from the corridor outside, came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Heavy ones. The kind of footsteps that did not hurry, because whatever made them had never needed to hurry for anything. Sova went still. Nora looked at the door. The footsteps stopped just outside. He filled the doorway completely. That was the first thing Nora registered. Not his size exactly, but what his size did to the doorway. Commander Drael stood at the entrance to the communal kitchen, and the doorway, which had always seemed adequately large, suddenly seemed like something a child had built out of scrap. He was old. Nora could feel it without knowing how she felt it. Not old like tired, but old like stone, like something that had been here long before the station was built and would still be here long after it was gone. His scales were deep violet like Sova's, but where Sova's were bright and almost iridescent, his had settled into something darker and more certain. The gold markings along his jaw and neck were thick and sharp. His eyes were the pale, still gold of a creature that had outlived most things it had ever looked at. He looked at Sova first. Something passed between them in the Drevi way. No words, just a long look with too much in it to read. Then he looked at Nora. Nora did not step back. She thought about it, the way the body always thinks about it when something very old and very large looks directly at you. But she did not step back. "You are the human medic," he said. His voice was deep in a way that was less about volume and more about weight, like it came from somewhere inside the station itself. "Nora Hale." "Yes." She paused. "Do you want a piece of cake?" Sova made a very small sound beside her. It might have been alarm. Commander Drael looked at the cake on the counter. He looked at it for a long moment without any readable expression. "Sova," he said, "you entered human quarters unaccompanied on your name day. You did not file a location report." "She came because she smelled it," Nora said. "From 2 corridors away. I can't take credit for the invitation. That was mostly the sugar." Drael turned his gaze back to Nora. She got the clear impression that most beings, when looked at by Commander Drael for this long, found something else to do with their eyes. She looked back. "This is not your concern," he said. "Not cruelly. Just as a fact being stated." "She was alone on her birthday," Nora said. "That made it my concern. Among Drevi, the name day is not a social occasion." "I know." Sova explained it to me. Something shifted very slightly in Drael's expression. He looked at Sova again. Sova was sitting very straight, her tail wrapped neatly around herself, her face composed. But she did not look afraid. Nora noticed that. She filed it away. "You told the human our customs," he said. "She asked," Sova said. Drael returned his attention to Nora. "Then you understand that what you have done here is contrary to what the name day is meant to be." "I do understand that," Nora said. "I think the name day as you practice it is meant to measure Sova against a standard. I think my version is meant to celebrate the fact that she exists. Those are 2 different things, and I'm not confused about which one I was doing." Another long silence. Somewhere down the corridor, the night shift Malurin passed again, its soft body making a faint sound against the floor. "Why?" Drael said. Just the one word. Not hostile. Not cold. Genuinely asking. Nora picked up the knife and cut a second slice of cake, just to have something to do with her hands. She set it on the counter. "Because she was alone," she said. "She's been alone on this day for 82 years. Nobody should be alone on their birthday. It's not a cultural thing. It's not a human thing. It's just a thing I believe is true. Every creature that makes it through another year in this universe deserves at least one moment where someone marks it. Not to judge it. Just to say, I know you're here. I'm glad you're here." Drael looked at the slice of cake on the counter. He looked at it for a long time. "And if the year was not a good one," he said, "if the creature did not grow, did not improve, was not stronger at the end than the beginning, then it's even more important," Nora said. He looked at her. "Because if the year was hard," she continued, "and they still made it through, that's not a failure. That's the hardest kind of surviving there is. That deserves the cake more than anything." The kitchen was very quiet. Nora had expected him to argue. She had her next 3 responses ready. But he did not argue. He stood in the doorway and he looked at her with those ancient pale gold eyes, and he did not say anything at all. And she realized Commander Drael, who had lived for longer than most stations had existed, who had negotiated treaties between civilizations, who had stood before councils that could end worlds, did not have an answer to what she had just said. That fact seemed to cost him something. She could see it. Then, carefully, with the deliberate slowness of a creature who made every movement count, he walked into the kitchen. He did not sit. He was too large for sitting in a human kitchen with any dignity. But he stood at the counter and he looked at the cake. He looked at the blown-out candle. He looked at the flowers still dusting the counter from where Nora had made her mess. He did not take the cake. But he did not leave. Nora quietly got herself a second slice. She did not offer it to him again. She had already offered. That was enough. The 3 of them stayed in the small, warm kitchen. The ancient commander, the young dragon, and the human who had started all this with a bag of reconstituted flour and a candle she had no good reason to keep. And no one said anything for a while. It was, Nora thought, a pretty good birthday. Ren came back 20 minutes later. He came back because, he said, he had left his mug. This was technically true. His mug was still on the counter where he had left it. But the mug was cold and had been cold for the full 20 minutes he had been gone. So the urgency of the retrieval was somewhat undermined. He stepped through the doorway, saw Commander Drael standing in the kitchen, and stopped. Drael looked at him. Ren looked at Drael. Ren said. He looked at his mug. He looked at Nora. Nora gave him a small, pleasant smile. He picked up the mug very carefully and walked back out. The door stayed halfway open. Drael watched him go. Something in the commander's expression shifted briefly, not quite amusement, but something adjacent to it. Something that suggested he recognized the behavior, even if it was not behavior his own kind would have shown. Your people startle easily, he said. We're working on it, Nora said. Sova made that small sound again. The possible alarm sound. This time Nora was more confident it was something else. Something lighter. The cycle was turning toward late shift. The kitchen lights had dimmed slightly on their automatic schedule, which meant the candle stub on the cake was now the brightest warm light in the room. It was not lit anymore, but the small circle of gold wax around it caught the overhead light and held it. Sova had been looking at the cake for a long time. She had not touched it, but she had also not looked away from it for very long, which Nora had started to understand was its own kind of thing for Drevi. They looked at what mattered to them. They just did not always say so. Commander Drael spoke first. She will be permitted to return to human quarters, he said. For study purposes. There are aspects of human cultural practice that are underrepresented in the diplomatic files. Nora nodded once. She's welcome anytime. Drael looked at her steadily. This is not an endorsement of the practice. Of course not. The name day accounting will still occur. I assumed. I want that to be clear. It is clear, Nora said. And then, because she could not entirely help herself, maybe just consider letting the accounting come after the cake next year. The silence that followed was the kind that had texture. Drael held it for a long moment. Then, without responding to that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. His footsteps went down the corridor and did not hurry, and then they were gone. Nora let out a long, slow breath. Sova was watching her. You are not afraid of him, she said. It was an observation, not a judgment. But there was something else in it, something like curiosity about how that was possible. I'm a little afraid of him, Nora said honestly. But I think you should be allowed to have a birthday that doesn't feel like a trial. That matters more than the afraid part. Sova was quiet. She looked back at the cake. The tilted, slightly lopsided, thoroughly mediocre cake with the blown-out candle in the middle. What did you wish for? Nora asked. You don't have to tell me. I'm just asking. A long pause. I wished, Sova said slowly, to understand why this felt different. She looked at Nora. I still do not fully understand it. That's okay, Nora said. You don't have to understand a thing for it to be real. Sova considered this in the careful way she considered most things, turning it over, examining the edges. Then she stood, slowly, in the way her kind moved when they were not in a hurry, which was most of the time. She was tall in the kitchen, her head nearly brushing the ceiling. She looked at the cake one more time. It was leaning, she said. I know. The human who makes the next one should consider the structural integrity of the base layer. I'll make a note. Sova moved toward the door. She stopped at the threshold, the same spot where she had stood earlier, looking in at the warm light and the strange small human making something sweet out of cheap ingredients and stubborn intention. She looked back. "Nora Hale," she said. "Yes." "I was at the observation window. For 82 cycles. Same time. Same window." She paused. "You are the first person who has ever known that and considered it a problem worth solving." She left without waiting for an answer. Nora stood alone in the kitchen for a moment. The candle stub sat on the tilted cake. The flour tin was still on the floor where it had fallen when Sova blew. One of the counter lights was buzzing quietly, still not quite recovered from the same event. She picked up the flour tin. She put it back on the shelf. She blew out the last of the smoke that was somehow still rising from the candle, though it had been out for an hour. She did not know, could not have known, that 3 days later, Commander Drael would file a formal request with the Drevi Diplomatic Council to add a supplemental study period to Sova's educational schedule, classified as cross-cultural immersion research. She could not have known that in his personal notation on the request, which no one outside the council would read for 40 years, he wrote a single line that the translators would later struggle with, because it was not quite a Drevi sentiment, and did not map cleanly onto any existing Drevi word. The closest translation anyone could manage was, "She was seen." Nora turned off the kitchen light. In Corridor 7, the observation window looked out at the same stars it always had. The same deep, indifferent dark. The same bright, scattered light of a universe that did not particularly notice any of them. But tomorrow, when the cycle turned and the station started its slow morning routine, Sova would not go to the window alone. She didn't know that yet either. Some things you only find out by showing up.